My name is Alyssa Walsh, and I am 28 years old, and by the time this story ends, my brother will have signed away the very empire he tried to steal from me. At our father's funeral, Derek slammed a contract on my desk and told me to sign over my shares before Friday. I smiled. I nodded. Then I walked downstairs to a server he didn't even know existed. The next morning, my credit cards were frozen. My office access was gone. He thought he had already won. He had no idea I was holding the trigger to end him. Before I tell you what happened next, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time below. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now let me take you back 4 years, to the day my father first taught me what real power looks like. The Nova Shield building always smelled like fresh paper and burnt coffee, the kind that sits too long on a warmer. I was 24 the first time my father let me sit in on a board call instead of Derek. His office had floor-to-ceiling windows that turned gray whenever the Seattle clouds rolled in, and the leather chairs made a specific creak, soft, familiar. Like they were breathing with the building. "You don't need to be the loudest voice in the room," he told me once, sliding a folder across the glass desk, his reading glasses pushed up into gray hair. "You need to be the last one standing when the room is empty." I didn't understand what he meant, not then. He kept a photograph on his desk of the two of us at the company's first server launch, me at 19, exhausted, proud, my hand resting on a machine the size of a refrigerator. Derek was in the photo too, in the background, checking his phone. That was always the picture of our family. My father and me, building something with our hands. Derek somewhere in the frame, but never really there. At dinners, Derek talked about deals he hadn't closed and clubs he'd been photographed at. My father would nod politely, and later, alone with me in his study, he'd rub his temples and say quietly, "That boy thinks inheritance is the same thing as earning it." I filed that sentence away without knowing why. I didn't have power yet. I only had a folder, a chair that creaked like it knew me, and a growing, quiet feeling that something in our family was already broken, long before anyone admitted it out loud. My father's diagnosis came on a Tuesday. Rare, aggressive, the kind of disease that takes the mind first and asks the body to wait its turn. I moved into the east wing of the estate within a month. I learned the names of 7 different medications before I learned how to sleep more than 4 hours a night. Derek flew in for exactly 1 hospital visit that year. I remember standing outside my father's door with a clipboard of his declining vitals when I heard Derek on the phone in the hallway, his voice low, almost bored. "Once he's gone, this whole thing streamlines. No committee, no messy shared control, just me." He wasn't talking about grief. He was talking about streamlining. That's the word they use for everything that used to be love. I said nothing. I went back into my father's room and adjusted his blanket like I hadn't heard a thing. But I filed it away, the same way I'd filed away every offhand comment, every absence, every excuse. I kept the servers running. I kept the contracts moving. I signed nothing that wasn't mine to sign. And I made sure no one outside that hallway knew how much of Nova Shield was actually being held together by a 26-year-old nobody thought was in charge of anything. To the board, I was such a help to her father. To Derek, I was staff with a family discount. I let them believe it. Because somewhere in those long, sleepless months, I stopped needing them to see me. Being invisible meant nobody was watching what I built in the quiet hours. And that, I realized, was the only kind of power they'd never think to take from me. 3 nights after the funeral, I went down to the basement. Behind the wine rack sat a server my father had kept off every network, a machine even Derek didn't know existed. I switched it on, and the fans roared to life in the freezing dark. It took 40 minutes to find the hidden partition. It asked for a retinal scan. Only 2 profiles had ever been registered to that scanner, his and mine. Inside was a folder labeled Icarus Protocol, bank transfers, encrypted messages. My father had spent his last clear months quietly documenting everything. Derek's secret deal to sell Nova Shield's core security software to a rival firm overseas, and underneath it, a gambling debt, near $12 million owed to men who did not accept late payments. Derek hadn't come home to grieve. He'd come home because his collateral, his inheritance, was the only thing standing between him and people who collect debts with more than lawyers. There was a video, my father thinner but lucid. "Alyssa, if you're watching this, I've built a switch into the mainframe. It freezes every asset, locks Derek out completely, and sends everything to federal authorities. I couldn't trigger it myself, so I tied it to your credentials. You hold this now." The next morning, I called the one number he'd left me, a lawyer named Grace Ackefer, already briefed, already waiting for my call. I heard Derek on the phone that same afternoon, laughing with someone about a wire transfer landing by Friday before anyone even reads the will. I texted Grace 2 words: "We're ready." That night, Derek went to sleep certain he had already won. I did not. Grace laid it out simply, the way good lawyers do. The dead man's switch was legal, airtight, and mine alone to activate. Once triggered, Derek's overseas deal would collapse. Every fraudulent document he'd built against me would be exposed as forgery. And the syndicate's collateral claim would become worthless overnight, because the shares would already be frozen under federal review. "You only get one chance to do this cleanly," she told me. "Are you sure?" Derek tried one more angle. He showed up with flowers of all things and an apology that sounded rehearsed. "I know I've been hard on you," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Sign with me and I'll make sure you're taken care of. 15%. Family looks after family." "I'll think about it," I said. My younger cousin Priya, who was staying at the estate that week, found me on the porch that evening and asked quietly why I looked like I hadn't slept in days. I told her I was fine. She didn't believe me. She was right not to. That night I drove out to the lake house my father used to take me to as a kid. I sat on the dock alone, the water black and still, and let myself finally cry, not because I was breaking, but because I finally understood what I was about to end. I wish this were different. I wish Derek had been the kind of brother who showed up because he wanted to, not because a camera was waiting. I wish our father hadn't needed a hidden server to protect his own daughter. But wishes don't hold up. What I have does. At 11:50 p.m., I sat alone at my father's desk, the same desk Derek had slammed his contract onto a week earlier. Grace joined by video call, her face lit by a laptop screen somewhere across the city. "Once you enter this, there's no undo," she said gently. "I know." I typed in the final authorization. My retina confirmed it. The screen turned white, then displayed a single line, "Protocol activated." Grace's voice was calm, almost warm. "It's done. Welcome to full control, Ms. Walsh." The clock read 12:03 a.m. "I am 28. I am now the sole controlling shareholder of Nova Shield Technologies." And across town, Derek was almost certainly asleep, dreaming about a signature he thought he'd have by Friday. He'd find out otherwise in about 9 hours. The company held a small memorial gathering the next morning. Board members in dark suits, standing stiffly near the same windows my father used to stare out of. Derek found me near the coffee station, all confidence checking his watch. "Well," he said, "Friday's coming. Have you thought about my offer?" "I have," I said, my voice even. "I'm declining." His smile faltered for exactly 1 second before his phone began buzzing, then buzzing again. He stepped away, and I watched his face drain of color as he read the freeze notice on his accounts, the collapsed European deal, the forged documents now flagged under his own name. He looked at me like I was still the fragile girl he thought he'd left behind in that office a week earlier. I wasn't. I hadn't been for months. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I simply turned, picked up my coffee, and walked back into the boardroom that was now, undeniably, mine. My father used to say, "You don't need to be the loudest voice in the room. You need to be the last one standing when the room is empty." I used to think he meant patience. He meant something sharper, that quiet isn't weakness. Quiet is where the real work gets done. Derek was indicted within the month, his overseas deal collapsing along with any leverage the syndicate thought they had. Grace still handles Nova Shield's legal affairs, and some mornings I still see her light on before mine. As for me, I kept the old server in the basement. I never had it removed. Some nights I still go down there, run my hand along the cold metal casing, and think about my father teaching a tired 24-year-old what power actually looks like. I think about him every time this company survives another quarter, and I think some inheritances aren't given. They're earned in rooms no one thought to watch. If you've ever had to stay silent to protect yourself, even when every part of you wanted to speak up, tell me in the comments. I read every one of them, and if this story moved you, subscribe. There are more to come.